This is AOS Shorts. Get better fast. Hello and welcome to AOS Shorts, your essential guide to all things Age of Sigmar. Now, it's been a while. I haven't recorded a podcast in several months now, and that's largely been for two reasons. First reason was we got the new edition, so I wasn't going to record anything until we'd had the dust settle and we saw the lie of the land. Once we got FAQs, we got the full battle tomes for Stormcast and Nighthaunt. So I've deliberately kept things on ice, but look, there's plenty of content coming now that we have got the FAQs and we sort of know where we sit. The other thing is that I've been focusing on the website. So I've been putting a lot of effort into the website, which is now a year old, trying to really flesh it out and grow it into areas beyond the sort of exclusive match play focus. So there's now articles on there on lore, narrative, hobby, a whole range of things, including guest articles on list tech, creator class series on how people have done massive display boards or come up with themes for their army, really talking to some of the amazing hobbyists that we have in our scene about basically what makes them tick and the processes and techniques that they use. So basically taking the masterclass format from match play gamers and applying it to other areas of our hobby. So, as I said, the website's been going from strength to strength, lots of people coming and visiting, which is great, hoping to see that it's being something useful for the community. Another thing I'd like to announce is that Dark Fantastic Mills, the premier Age of Sigmar 3D printed terrain manufacturer, is coming on board to sponsor the show and the website. So Dark Fantastic Mills is the new business venture of a guy called Gary from the UK, who many of you may know from Twitter at Garissimo, who has, over the last year or so, basically knocked it out the park in terms of 3D printed terrain that fits the Age of Sigmar dynamic, that is something sort of completely different to the other products available out there. And he also makes absolutely amazing trophies, which if you've seen any of the photos from UK tournaments recently, including the upcoming Bravery 1 British Open, you'll see the sort and Six Nations about a month ago, you'll see absolutely stunning trophies that he's managed to 3D print. He's a blooming wizard. But anyway, so Dark Fantastic Mills, so that's darkfantasticmills.com, do four main ranges for Age of Sigmar: Plague, Metal, Desert and Beasts. And I'm going to do a couple of videos going forward because in the past I've bought a couple of tables worth of terrain of tables of this terrain, and so I'm going to be doing some videos, painting them up, showing you what the quality of the 3D prints look like, how they paint up, how you can incorporate them, base them, etc. So I'm going to do some of those. One of the other things that is also coming is Gary's going to send me through a discount code, so particular to AOS Shorts. So if you use the AOS Shorts discount code, then you will get a discount off the terrain on Gary's site. So you'll hear more in the future, but I just wanted to sort of announce it now. So let's move on to today's show. The FAQs are out. So Games Workshop have now got in a very good habit, long may it continue, of reasonably rapidly putting out errata and commentary after new releases. So they sort of give themselves a 2-week window, but for something like an edition drop like this, unsurprisingly, it took a little bit longer. And so they are now out on 24 July. So less than a month after the new edition dropped, they've released a comprehensive set of errata and commentary. Now, I'm not going to go through all the changes that came out at the time of second edition. There's quite a lot there. It's worth reading them all. And I assume people have worked their way through those, and there's really too much to cover in what I normally do in an AOS Shorts episode. So either read them or listen to, I think Warhammer Weekly did a show with Chuck Moore on where, as part of the news segment, they spent about 2 hours going through the new FAQs that came out at the time of second edition. So what am I going to focus on? I'm going to focus on the changes that have come out in these 24 July FAQs. And as I mentioned, FAQs are split into errata, which are normally changes to the scroll, and commentary. So those tend to be more answers to questions, so sort of what if and how does this work, and the sort of more looser ones. Still just as applicable, taken as guidance, but very useful still. Now, one of the sort of little bugbears with this is that they've now got 2 documents for pretty much every single publication. So there's more than 50 different PDF files available for download on Warhammer Community. Quite a few to get through. So one of the things that I've done to try, as I've done with previous FAQs, to try and make it easier, is I've compiled them all into one single PDF. So you can download one PDF that has all of the errata and designer commentary. It's text searchable and it's bookmarked. So you can jump just to where you need to go. And it's sorted with the main books first and then by alliance. So that's available on iosshorts.com and is hopefully of use to people. Let's talk about what they are doing with these errata and commentary. So the errata and commentary, for me, have really done 2 things. One, they've gone through and they've made a number of changes, big and small. The small changes are largely for the purposes of consistency. We know there's hundreds and hundreds of war scrolls, and occasionally things get missed or left out or need to be tweaked to be updated for new wording or new dynamics. And so those have been picked up. I'll touch on some of those as I go through this show, but not many. The main changes, what they've done is, and what I think Games Workshop has shown that they do with all of their FAQs, and especially with some of the 40k ones, is they try to hit the nail on the head, or hit on the head early, negative play experiences that have come through the process and have emerged. So if you've been sort of plugged into the Age of Sigmar scene, or on Facebook, or social media, or podcasts, or YouTube, then you would have seen there's been quite a bit of noise and a bit of heat generated, especially out of the iOS Six Nations, about some of the lists that were brought, basically using, no judgment at all, completely fairly using dynamics that were available in the rules, but can lead to what some people perceive as a very negative play experience because they're not interactive, or they sort of break the game. They're sort of outside some of the fundamental written rules in Age of Sigmar, because either a scroll has been sort of left behind or there's not been a dynamic that's been picked up. So I'd have to say all of those, as far as I'm aware, all of those have now been addressed. So all of that noisy noise or early noise has now been sort of picked up, dealt with. We've also seen a couple of changes in the FAQs and errata, which I will go through, which sort of tweaked some of what appeared to be automatic choices. So I know as a sort of rules design perspective, Games Workshop don't want to have auto choices. You don't want to have one artifact or one unit or one command trait that is just head and shoulders above everything else. So you just take that one and you don't take anything else. And it sets the list build, it sets the dynamic, it sets how the army plays. So for a whole range of reasons, I know Games Workshop are trying to stop those or make it harder, give you more choice, give you more variety. So some of those have been dealt with. And from what I've seen in terms of commentary online and all the people that have looked at these, the new FAQs and errata, is the general consensus seems to be that these have done the job. These have done what we were looking for. And from my own personal perspective, hopefully it will mean that TOs or people looking to run events in the next couple of months can rely on these set of FAQs and don't have to introduce their own level of army building or play restrictions or rules rewrites. Basically, anything loosely defined as comp or compositional restrictions or others which was a thing in the past with Warhammer Fantasy, but has certainly been far less so in Age of Sigmar. From my personal perspective, I like playing out of the book, and I think that heavy compositional rules packs, which set a whole range of additional rules, can be excluding to newer players and set additional barriers and things like that. I won't go into it in any more detail than that, but hopefully these erratas have sort of headed that off at the pass. So let's get into it. What are the main things that have been addressed? Command ability stacking was one of the big things which came out of Six Nations. Was now that we've got this dynamic where everybody has multiple command points, you can spend multiple command points in the same hero phase, you can use the same command ability on the same hero multiple times by spending command points. I know this, I did this myself at the Warhost tournament last month, where I took Croak and I kept spending command points in my first turn to get as many rerolls as I could to get my spells off. Now, this has largely been this is a dynamic that they've wanted to introduce with Age of Sigmar 2nd edition, is to get more flexibility with use of command abilities, so you're not tied to your general, you can use it from your heroes, and you've now got a new resource to play with. Good. The ways that it got abused was that there were a couple of command abilities which were left, which weren't picked up at the time of release, which allowed you either weren't picked up or have led to a community ruling or consensus which was different than expected, and produced a sort of extreme outcome. The most extreme one being Wargamer Donald's Grot Warboss from Six Nations. The Grot Warboss command ability allows you to double the damage of attacks. And I can't remember how many command points he managed to spend in one turn. It was something like 5 or whatever. So if you're doubling the damage 5 times, then you get some very, 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 very powerful grots. And I don't think that was particularly intended. So how has Games Workshop dealt with the sort of negative play experiences around command abilities? They've done 3 things. One, they've either changed completely the command ability. So that Grot Warboss, I'm the boss now, stab it, I'm good, command ability has changed. It no longer doubles damage, it does mortal wounds as well, or does mortal wounds instead. They've either done that, or they have said that you cannot use the command ability more than once. So particular command abilities have been amended so you can only use them once. Or they've been amended so that you can use them multiple times, but you can't pick the same target more than once. So that means that you've just got to spread it around different units and you're not going to create some super unit of grots. So that's how they've dealt with command abilities. Looks good to me. Hopefully we will see some more of it on the table. Now, a couple of other things in terms of overall rules that I'm interested in. One, double pinning. So this was something which was the new pylon rules, which is that if you're in base-to-base contact with another model, then you can still move. You're not locked in place as long as you finish still in base-to-base contact with that model. So you can sort of shuffle around, or if you fly, you can jump over them as long as you still end in base-to-base. Now, one of the questions that arose was, well, what if you're in double pinned? So you've got 2 enemy models in base contact. Which one of them is the nearest model? Which one is the closest model you've got to stay in contact with? And the answer is that you've got to stay in contact with both. So you can still move, you might still be able to shuffle a little bit, but you've got to end your pylon move still in contact with those 2 models. So this is going to have consequences for units with large bases, facing units like Nighthaunt, which have horde flying units, because they'll basically be able to come in and envelop your models and you're not going to be able to move. So you're going to have to think carefully about your positioning so that you don't get pinned in a position which isn't going to be particularly helpful. So that's double pinning. Another thing I wanted to touch on, allies. So one of the areas of confusion, and a few of us were debating in the Sylvaneth chat and others, was what is an ally? So an ally was defined in the rules as factions listed effectively in the pitch battle profiles in the General's Handbook. Now, that's all well and good, but there are several battalions, particularly in Sylvaneth and some of the older books, that allow you to take models from other factions which aren't allies or aren't available as allies in your General's Handbook pitch battle tables. For example, if I take the Ironbark Wargrove, or I take Gnarlroot and I take Lord Croak, for instance, in the Gnarlroot as my order wizard, then what's the status of Lord Croak? Because Seraphon aren't an ally. Can he get artifacts? Can he get spells? Because normally the restriction on I can't give an artifact or I can't give a spell is to someone who is an ally. I can't give them those things. But if I'm this sort of amorphous grey category, could I give them or could I not? And that has been tidied up very clearly, that any unit that doesn't have the keyword of the army's allegiance is an ally. So a very clear rule that things like Lord Croak in an Gnarlroot or Dwarden units in an Ironbark are allies, but they are not, as the way that it is dealt with is that while they are allies and they can't be given spells or artifacts, etc., they don't count for the purposes of the ally restrictions in the pitch battle tables in General's Handbook. So you don't have to worry about counting those units and the points of those units for the percentage threshold of models for allies, and you also don't have to count them for the 1 in 4 numeric threshold on allies. So good change there. One of the other things which has caused contention as we sort of move on to scenarios is that named characters don't have artifacts for rules purposes. So this is significant largely for scenarios, because 2 of the new General's Handbook 18 scenarios have capture conditions which require you to capture either with a wizard or with a hero with an artifact of power. Now, if you take a character, a named character like Volturnus, for instance, you can't give him an artifact. He's got sort of comes with his own equipment, but you can't give him an artifact of power. He's not a wizard. He's not going to be able to capture objectives. So that has been set clearly. That's the rule. That's where things are. It's just something that you need to be aware of. Also has consequences for things like Gildenbane, which is a malign sorcery artifact. Can't remember which realm it is from the moment. Sorry, forgive me. Which allows you to turn off an opposing character's artifacts. So if you're going into a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with the Ethereal Amulet, you can turn that amulet off, and so your rend will work. Very useful if you're flying a Dragon Lord into it. Shout out to James McGregor, who was doing that to lots of people at Warhost. Now, you're not going to be able to use that on someone like Nagash or others to turn off their artifacts. So this is relevant also because there's a slight tweak to the Arcane Power scenario, which is one of the new scenario places of arcane power scenario in General's Handbook 18, where it's just been clarified or errata to say that the hero or wizard that has captured the objective has to stay within the inches distance from the objective. They can't tag it and then move away. Because, as we know, the default position now under 2nd edition is that in scenarios you can capture an objective, move away, and you count as holding it even until the enemy captures it. Now, I've still got a personal question as to whether or not that works. If your unit has then died, do you still hold it? I presume not. And it's clear that you certainly don't if you are a wizard or a hero in hero with artifact in arcane power. One of the things I want to touch on before we move into malign sorcery a bit more is army building. So one of the things here, and it was in the early days in sort of General Handbook 16, I think, and maybe before that, was that you could select your army to fit particular compositions. So thinking battle line if units. So there's a number of units in the game which are battle line if they're within a particular army. So you could have an army where Judicators were battle line if in a sort of Stormcast army, but then when it came to selecting allegiance abilities, your choice was between Stormcast and Grand Alliance Order, and you could choose the Grand Alliance Order abilities. That was something that you could do. You can't do that anymore. And it just makes it easier in terms of army building. You're not army building for one purpose, or don't have a set of rules for army building for one purpose and then add allegiance abilities on the top. You just build your army in compliance with the structures. So you're not going to be able to have battle line adjudicators counting as battle line in an Grand Alliance Order army. So let's move on to Malign Sorcery. So Malign Sorcery is a really interesting addition to the game. It brings in a whole range of artifacts, and I know there's a number of tournaments now which have been playing with using the new spells and the new Realmscape features. People have done that in a variety of ways, either allowing one realm spell or all of the realm spells, or determining which particular realms are going to be included. So things like the realm of beasts has been left out in a few tournaments so that people don't have to worry about bringing an extra monster onto the table, and things like that. So there's going to be a feature of the game going forward. It's a really cool addition. It adds some more flavour without adding too much additional bloat or time. So going on to the spells and the artifacts, there were a couple which were jumping out as being particularly powerful. They were Banishment, Lens, Portal, Geminids in terms of endless spells. And so each of those have sort of largely been changed. So Banishment. Banishment was is a spell from the Law of Haish, the Law of Light. And the old rule was that it was cast on an 8. You picked an enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster that's visible to them. You remove that unit from the battlefield and set it up again on the battlefield, more than 9 inches from any models from the caster's army, and more than 24 inches from the caster. So basically you could pick up an enemy unit and throw it across the board, and you could put it in a really disadvantageous position, either miles away from an objective, or you could put it within range of a unit which has got a whole range of charge buffs, so that sort of 9-inch distance isn't an issue. Really powerful spell, especially if you're facing armies which are low movement. If you've got a foot-slogging Duardan army or a foot-slogging Stormcast army, then you could just take their best unit and make it irrelevant for the entire game by putting it in the corner of the board. This has now changed, so the way that it is changed is it's still an 8 to cast and still 12 inches, but now the opponent must remove it and set it up again more than 24 and 9 inches away. So the opponent gets to decide where it goes. Far less useful in terms of an offensive spell. But potentially allows you to take out require the opponent to move a unit out of combat or out of objective range. So you're still going to get some benefit from it. It's still going to cause some wrinkles in your opponent's plans potentially, but it's not as clearly one-sided, or not as one-sided as it was. So let's move on to an artifact. Lens of Refraction. Lens has been very popular in the month or so since second edition released, basically because it's an amazing mortal wound protection. So Lens was an artifact which allowed that each time a friendly unit within 6 inches of the bearer would suffer any mortal wounds from a spell cast by an enemy wizard, roll a d3 and reduce the number of mortal wounds suffered by the result. So this massive anti-mortal wound bubble that could really turn off your opponent's spell power. And in a heavy sort of early spell meta, then this was particularly useful. At the Midwest Meltdown, there were several Nagash lists running, claiming to be from Haish, so that they could get Lens of Refraction, put it on a Lord Executioner, which has got a number of saves. It's got an unmodifiable armor save, then he's got a ward save, then he's got another save, and then he would have Lens. So you've got a highly resilient small character. This buff would just stay up all game pretty much. So now it's been changed so that once per battle round, the first time a friendly unit within 6 inches suffers any mortal wounds, roll a d3 and reduce the number of mortal wounds suffered by the result. So it's not all the time, it's once a battle round, it's the first time, so the enemy can make some choices as to which spells or which attacks they use at a time. So they could do an arcane bolt that does 1 mortal wound. That gets lens off, and then they could do an area of effect mortal wound spell which hits multiple units, and that would be fine. The other tweak that they have made is that they've removed it. It's not just from spells cast now, it's any mortal wounds. So it's the first time any mortal wounds are suffered that it applies. Moving on. So let's get on to endless spells. There is a couple of major changes here. One, Portal. So Portal was highly popular. Portal was highly popular because basically it allows you to increase the range and visibility of your spells by the distance between the portals. So you've got an 18-inch gap between the portal, and then you measure range and visibility from the end of the other portal. So I took this to Warhost. I used it with Croak and a whole range of buffed area of effect mortal wound spells, so that I was casting spells. So I would portal set up 1 inch away from my casters. It's then the other portal is 18 inches away, so that's 19 inches from my casters, and I'm then doing an area of effect spells which were anywhere between 9 and, can't remember the highest, I think 26 inches or something, bubble around from the end of the portal. So I'm hitting massive numbers of units. So I would do that. I did that, and then I put 11 spells through the portal or something like that, almost 11 spells, and did everything that I could. Now, that can't work anymore because of 3 main changes to Portal. You can't use the portal multiple times in the same phase now. You can only cast 1 spell through it. Still going to be very useful for Nagash lists which want to Hand of Dust you, or potentially also Arcane lists that might want to Curse of Years you, but why pay the points for Portal given you can buff Arcane's range so well that you're probably going to be hitting what you want anyway. So you can definitely still see it being in Nagash Hand of Dust list though. The other thing to note is that an endless spell now can't be set up through the portal. So a setup range for an endless spell can't be modified in any way. So if you've got, say, the Silverwood Circlet, which allows you to buff the range of spells by 6 inches, then you can't add 6 inches to the setup range for endless spells. You can't set up Purple Sun or Geminids 6 inches further away. You also can't set them up through the portal. So you're not going to be casting Purple Sun a great distance away. The other thing they've clarified is that endless spells, predatory endless spells, which are set up and then moved, once they've gone through the portal, don't then get another move because they've been set up. So the wording on the War Scroll was, if you set it up, it immediately moves. Well, if it moves, goes through the portal, it gets reset up, would it move again? No, it doesn't. It stays where it is at the end of the portal within 6 inches. And you can't do this thing where they bounce back and forth between the portals or any other weird things that people were trying to do. So that's the major change to Portal. It's a good change. Interesting to see how much we now get Portal being used. I think it will be there a small bit, but in particular lists, but it's not going to be the Magic Take Mortal Wound Bomb list. Now, the other change in an endless spell is Geminids. So Geminids is also a very popular and powerful spell. People running the 2 balls of light, a ball of light and ball of shadow round together, running them over the same unit. So you do both sets of buff and debuff, or both sets of debuffs and the mortal wound damage from both over the same unit. You now can't do that anymore. So you've either got to run them over separate units, or only one of the balls, either the ball of light or the ball of shadow, will apply. So you don't get both sets of debuffs. You'll have to pick one. So just checking, I think that's... the other thing to mention on endless spells, if they've clarified how endless spells work with some of the spell stealing abilities. So it's not enough for you to know an endless spell for you to cast it. So there are particular abilities in the game which allow a wizard to know enemy wizard spells or to learn enemy wizard spells. Now, if you know them, you can't cast them unless you've paid the points for them. So you're not going to be casting enemy endless spells. You will be able to cast their normal spells, but not their endless spells. Haven't quite thought through how that applies for Curseling, which is that it allows you to sort of immediately recast the spell. I presume by the same logic that would apply in that you can't cast unless you've paid the points for it, but I haven't thought through that, so I don't want to give a definitive answer. One of the other things they've noticed, and a couple of other points to note, is that endless spells get moved at the start of the battle round before either player's turn. So one of the questions was asked was, well, if I do damage to Morathi with a endless spell, does her Ironheart of Cain ability apply, which limits the amount of damage that she can take within a particular turn? And the answer is Ironheart does not apply, and so you've got free reign to do endless spell damage to Morathi outside of the sort of normal turn sequence with an endless spell. It's going to be very rare that it will come up because you're going to be reliant on sort of you getting a double turn, the opponent then moving an endless spell, and then choosing to move a different spell other than the one that's going to damage Morathi. So rare, but something to know. And the final thing, a point of clarification, was that with Unbinding and the Portal, you measure the Unbind to the caster, not to the Portal. So the Portal is, as it says on the tin, only used for the range and visibility of the caster casting the spell. Cool, blimey, this is turning into a longer show than I thought it was going to be. I just want to touch on a few things from the various different erratas for the particular factions and allegiances. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just trying to pick out the absolute highlights. So, Blades of Khorne and Disciples of Tzeentch, the way their artifacts and things and demonic boons and gifts and all of that stuff has changed. Previously, you were limited to particular heroes taking particular ones, whether you were mortal or demon or whatever. You can now just select from across the range. So it's given more choice to those Blades of Khorne and Disciples of Tzeentch on that, and taken out a sort of level of fuss. Might allow more combinations that we haven't seen before come into play. Everchosen. So Everchosen had a number of battalions which were particularly favourable when they were taken outside of the Everchosen allegiance and put elsewhere. So in particular, Plague Touched for Nurgle, Fate Sworn, very, very popular for Tzeentch, because effectively these were old battalions that were undercosted when they could be taken outside of the Everchosen allegiance, with the way that their keywords worked. So those have now been changed. So you can't use an Everchosen battalion, or sorry, I'll rephrase that. You can use an Everchosen battalion in a Nurgle or Tzeentch army or whatever, but the battalion and all of the units which comprise it count as allies. So you're only ever going to do that in like a 10,000 point game or something similar. It's not going to be relevant for 2,000 point match play anymore. Moving on, Nighthaunt. So Nighthaunt have got some changes which now mean that particular Nighthaunt units can be taken directly in the Legions of Nagash army, and they don't count as allies, so they are just straight in there. That's fine. The point to note, though, is that if you wanted to take a Nighthaunt battalion as well as those units, then the units themselves wouldn't count as allies because you're just selecting them as part of the Legions of Nagash, but the Nighthaunt battalion itself would be an ally, and so you'd be paying the points for the Nighthaunt battalion out of your ally points. A little weird, but that's how I think it works. While we're on death, other clarifications. Previously, something I know local death players have had to explain a few times is that when Curse of Years gets down to a 1, it auto wipes the unit. But but units do get a mortal wound save, or a similar sort of last gasp save against Curse of Years. So clear, just a bit of clarification there as to how that works. Deepkin. So a couple of changes to Deepkin. One, they've had some points changes which came out at the time in June. The other thing to note, though, is in relation to their shipwrecks. So a few people were playing with the idea of using the shipwrecks to basically create massive walls, either walling off particular parts of the battlefield or screening off objectives massively, so that foot-slogging heroes and things would have to, I think you've got to spend like 11 inches worth of movement in order to get over the shipwreck. So it's going to take you forever to get to the objective, and by that point they've probably scored enough points that you're not going to get in the game. So they've now changed that. So what they have changed is now the ships can't be near objectives. They've got to be more than 6 inches away from the objective point, and have got to be more than 6 inches away from other shipwrecks. Now they do get a slight benefit, a slight buff to counter fail that reduction, which is that you can now place them after you know what territory you have. So that's a benefit to the Deepkin player. Previously you'd have to place them like Sylvaneth Wildwoods before you knew which side you were taking. Now you do it after. What other things to rattle through quickly in order? Fireslayer command ability is now wholly within and can be used multiple times. KO, I'm not going to spend too much time on KO, but again, they've got some issues. Or some changes, not issues, but changes which affect the Alpha Strike build. So they now disembark in the hero phase, and grapnels have changed. So basically you've got to do a whole, or the Alpha Strike will still be useful against, especially in a strong Nagash meta, or Zilfin will be very useful given if there's a lot of Nighthaunt, given all the flyers, but you're going to have to be a bit more creative about some of the tools. Now, Seraphon. Seraphon have had a large number of had quite a few changes in the FAQ. I've spoken to a number of top Seraphon players about how they feel about these changes, and they're all generally positive about where the army still sits after these changes. So I wouldn't get super dramatic about it, but the clear is there's a number of major changes that have been made. One is Lord Croak. So Croak was sort of a hands down, absolutely amazing option at 450 points because his wall scroll in the FAQ allowed him to cast his Celestial Deliverance spell, which was a large area of effect mortal wound spell, 3 times in the same hero phase. You could buff the casting with Astrolith Bearers, other ways of buffing the cast. You could use his command ability with rerolls in order to make sure that you didn't fail any of those spells. So you could spam massive amounts of mortal wounds. I've seen numbers of sort of 50 plus, anywhere between sort of 50 and 100 odd mortal wounds in a single hero phase from Croak, which was just immensely powerful. So one of the changes that they've done, they've changed Celestial Deliverance, which is the main spell. So it was previously cast on a 7-8-9, is now cast on an 8-9-10. It now hits fewer units, has a shorter range, and does less damage. So they've affected all elements of the spell, which are good changes, really. They have also changed his command ability. So it used to be that you would spend a command point, roll 3 dice, and for every 4 plus, you got a reroll, which was very useful, especially when you're using multiple command points. Now that's changed, and instead you generate new command points. So you can spend a command point and you've got a chance to generate extra command points. Less useful, I think, but we'll see. I haven't really thought it through that much, mainly because of the other changes to Croak. One of the other things they've clarified is that he's got a wound. He is counted as having a wound characteristic of 7 for all purposes other than being slain. So yes, he can still go on a Balewind, but no one needs to worry about what his wound characteristic was when it was a star. Only other things to note on Seraphon, there's a change to the Astrolith Bearer in terms of the range. The Starseer, boo, the Starseer game is gone. Starseer game was one of those guessing dice games. So you sort of thought of a number, and your opponent thought of a number, and as long as they weren't the same, that was the number of rerolls that you got. So that has now gone. So now that is, you generate command points rather than getting rerolls. There's also a change to rippers. Ripperdactyls now do D3 hits instead of an extra one. So ripperdactyls was something that was often addressed quickly in tournament packs, because rules as written, you could just keep generating additional attacks. So you generate some additional attacks, then generate more additional attacks, then more additional attacks with rippers. That ability has now been changed, so you just generate D3 extra hits if you meet the qualifying rules. So this is quite useful. You get D3 extra hits rather than one, and it avoids a bit of confusion about how the rule works. Engine summoning, so Engine of the Gods. I know Darren Watson took a heavy summoning list which had about 4 Engines of the Gods in it, could summon several hundred points a turn in its 6 nations. That's now been changed slightly, so you can still do a large amount of summoning, but those summoned units can't then move afterwards. So if you're summoning large amounts of chaff, you don't care, because you're just stuck putting things in place. But if you were summoning combat units or things like that, then it's basically been brought in line with the rest of the rules, which are if you summon a unit, it then can't move. Stormcast. Things to note on Stormcast. Only a few changes. So there were changes to the command abilities for Anvils of Helldon Hammer, Celestial Vindicators, and Hammers of Sigmar, basically to avoid multiple spamming on the same unit. So Anvils, you can use their command ability, which allows you to attack in the hero phase. You can use that more than once, but you can't use it on the same unit more than once, so you can't get a buffed up unit of, ballistas or vanguards or something like that. That's the same with Vindicators. Can use multiple times but not on the same unit. And Hammers of Sigmar's one is just once a phase, so you can't use it multiple times. Other ones are untouched. Evocators get Law of Invigoration, which sort of fits their I'm a Wizard characteristics, and that's sort of it for Stormcast. The final thing I was going to touch on was Sylvaneth. So, number of good changes for Sylvaneth. I'm a Sylvaneth player. I'm very happy with where this has gone, and that is that Wildwoods count as blocking line of sight. So they pick up the same rule that is on the Citadel Wood Scroll, which means that they block line of sight. So very, very useful for screening off parts of the board from shooting armies or from magic that require visibility. So really, really useful. Nice touch. Like it. The other things are basically leftovers from the June changes, which are that the Envoys of the Everqueen bubble, which was a bubble ability from the Tree Lord Ancient, which allowed you to reroll ones for your saves, used to work that you sort of got these bubbles all over the board. So effectively you could get your entire army covered with this protection. Now you've just got one bubble, and you either measure that bubble from the Tree Lord Ancient or you measure that bubble from one unit of Colonel Hunters. So less sort of valuable in terms of that, but that's the sort of major Sylvaneth change. So, as I said, I've sort of gone on much longer than I thought I was going to. It took me much longer to go through these, but this is a sort of whistle-stop tour through the new 24 July FAQs. I highly recommend you read them. Now, it can be a bit daunting. There is now 86 pages of FAQ, errata, and commentary that you need to know for match play. Oh, before I forget, don't forget the Silver Tower errata. And the reason why is because it deals with Skaven generals who want to use the Death Runner or whatever it is, the Skaven hero, which is actually 2 models. You don't get 2 command abilities. Personally, I always thought that was a bit abusive to think that they both get it when one is just a shadow or image of the other. So it's been clarified, you just get 1 command ability. So no extra spamming for Skaven armies. It's worth reading all of it. Don't leave any of the ones out, though look, you can probably skip Dominion of Chaos and Chaos Dreadhorde, but there's about 86 pages or so there, so it's worth having a read through, because a lot of the points have been answered and have been dealt with. So really looking forward to seeing where second edition goes and where second edition grows now that people know the lie of the land for the core rules, and also get to see where Stormcast and Nighthaunt end up, and some of the other favourites now, Nagash, and Legions of Nagash being very popular. Cool. Okay. So thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find me at aosshorts.com, at AOS_shorts on Twitter. I changed my Twitter address to make it easier to find me, and AOS Shorts on Facebook. So feel free to get in touch. Tell me what I missed. Tell me what I got horribly wrong. Tell me what you'd like to see from the website. Really looking forward to hearing from you. And as I said at the start of the show, highly recommend checking out darkfantasticmills.com. I'll put all the details in the show notes. There's more info to come. I'll have videos and discount codes shortly, but it's definitely worth checking out Gary's website. Cool. All the best, and bye for now. Cheers.